Hello, and welcome to another episode of We Are What We Read. I'm your host, Kristopher Zgorski, the founder and sole reviewer at the award-winning blog BOLO Books. And as always, the Barbie to my Ken is, or the Barbie to my Alan, I should probably say, is the one and only Shawn Reilly Simmons. How are you doing, Shawn?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. It's so fun that we coordinated pink when we saw Barbie, and now we're coordinating gray. For some reason, we just showed up in gray today. But I'm really happy to be here. This has been such a fun um, project to be involved in. It's so awesome to listen to all these wonderful writers and reviewers and fans of the mystery genre and other genres talk about the books that have inspired them. It's just been so fun to be involved in this. I love it so much.
Thanks so much. I'm so appreciative that you've been my co-host through this whole process, and I'm very appreciative of the whole community embracing We Are What We Read and celebrating what we love about books. And tonight we have 8 new guests to discuss them, and we're going to jump right in to the very first guest. Cheryl Head. Cheryl A. Head writes the Anthony and Lambda Literary Award nominated Charlie Mack Motown Mysteries. Her latest book, Time's Undoing, is a crime novel based on her family's personal tragedy. Time's Undoing is an Indie Next pick and an Amazon editor's pick for Best Mystery, Thriller, and Suspense. Welcome, Cheryl.
Hi, Kristopher. Hi, Shawn. Thank you for the invitation to be here. It's a great idea. I'm glad you came up with it. Should I just jump right into my presentation?
Sure thing. Go right ahead.
All righty. So if you're a lifelong reader and you hear the question, what's a book that has influenced your own writing and life? The titles just start buzzing through your brain. I've spoken before about the influence Edith Hamilton's book, Mythology, Timeless Tales of Gods and Heroes, had on the dreamy and adventurous 12-year-old me when I first found that book at a library in Detroit. And my foray into crime fiction was clearly influenced by books by Black women, specifically Blanche on the Lamb by Barbara Neely and the work of queer author Nikki Baker. But tonight I want to recommend a 1993 book whose themes still haunt me. It's House of Sand and Fog by Andre Dubus III. Written in first person in alternating narratives, House of Sand and Fog's central conflict revolves around 2 hapless souls vying for the ownership of a home, a one-story bungalow in California's Bay Area, which really is a metaphor for their sense of self, success, and security that they both seek. Masood Amir Bahrani is an American immigrant, a former Iranian colonel, and a proud man reeling with his deflated change in status. Kathy Niccolo is down on her luck. She's a recovering addict, working as a house cleaner, and her husband has recently left her. But the home in question is hers, a gift from her deceased father, and it's the one piece of stability she can cling to. But Bahrani is able to purchase the home at auction after a mistake by local officials in assessing back taxes, and that's where a tragic struggle begins. The ownership battle is actually secondary to the internal conflicts of the novel's flawed protagonists. And there's also a third major character in this book, a deputy sheriff who's lost his way in his career and in his marriage. He shows up to evict Kathy, but ends up falling in love with her, and then takes risky liberties with his authority as he involves himself in the struggle over the house. I'm a sucker for a story about people chasing the American dream, only to discover that it's an ideal invented to control us and keep us in competition and conflict. House of Sand and Fog is such a story. It's both modern and Shakespearean, with themes torn from today's headlines: the assimilation of immigrants, the irrational acts of people fearful that they've lost status in the world, the siren call of addiction, the perilous fall that often occurs in those with boastful pride, the frustrations with government bureaucracy, the elbowing inherent in changing demographics, and also excessive force in policing. The writing is sometimes appropriately mundane as the reader follows the daily activities of the 3 protagonists, but at the same time also quite literary. And while reading this novel, I was often reminded of Thoreau's quote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." House of Sand and Fog is important and engaging, but there's no happy ending. And I'm old enough to know that's often the case with life. But I believe we're in the midst of the themes and the values and circumstances explored in this novel. but I certainly hope we can avoid Debus's sad resolution. Finally, I should say House of Sand and Fog was a finalist for the National Book Award for Fiction. It was selected for Oprah's Book Club in 2000, and in 2003, it was adapted into a well-received film starring Ben Kingsley and Jennifer Connelly and Iranian actress Shohreh Aghdashloo. So my recommendation is House of Sand and Fog.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I remember the movie, but I haven't read the book, so I'm definitely gonna make that change and read that book because the
And
movie,
I've not seen the movie, so I'm going to watch it actually soon.
yeah, it stayed with me. So it was a very impactful story for sure. I'm so glad to know that you love the novel as well, because I haven't read it. And so good to see you. I never
Good
see
to see you. See you soon too.
I know, right? I know, you're right. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate it, Cheryl. And fun fact, Cheryl's book, Times Undoing, has been recommended on the show by another guest in a previous episode.
Thank you, Sherry Harris, for that.
Yeah, that was great. So well deserved.
All right.
Nice.
Thanks so much, Shawn and Kristopher. See you soon.
See you soon. Bye. Our next guest is Marco Carocari. Marco originally hails from Switzerland and now lives in the Californian desert. His debut novel, Blackout, was nominated for a Lefty and won the New York City Big Book Award and Independent Press Award for Best LGBTQ Novel. We're so pleased to have Marco on the show. How you doing, Marco? Come on, tell us what you got.
Nervous. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Shawn and Kristopher, for inviting me to be part of this. The book that I picked is Jordan Harper's She Writes Shotgun, which won the 2017 Edgar Award for Best Debut. And I just recently discovered this book last year, came late to the party, but it blew my mind on many, many levels. As a reader who just really enjoyed the story, but also as a writer, I learned so much from this book. It's the story of hardened criminal Nate, who was just released from prison, but not before making a very powerful enemy in Crazy Craig Hollington, a lifer and head of an area of a sort of white supremacist gang, Aryan Steel. And Crazy Craig just put a death mark on Nate's head, Nate's ex-wife's head, and his daughter, Polly. Polly is a shy, awkward, introverted 11-year-old who walks around with a teddy that she talks to and sort of expresses herself through. And she's more than a little terrified when her dad, who she's not seen in years, shows up suddenly at school where she is and practically kidnaps her. What she does not know is that there are people after them to kill them, that they already got her mother, and that her dad is trying to save her life. And the novel grabbed me on very different levels. First of all, it kind of grips you by the throat and drags you through this book, very fast-paced book, through just such powerful prose. It's poetic and beautiful in certain areas, sometimes darkly funny, but most of the time it's just brutal and honest and raw. And it starts with this fantastic opening chapter that to me was a masterclass in writing in a way of its own, explaining just how powerful this Crazy Craig is, who is in prison, but is like a god to his followers and has very far reach out into the world. But it continues in the rest of the book, and there's a lot of conflict between each character with life, but also between the characters, and it kind of propels the story forward. At the same time, you have these characters who are just amazing. In my opinion, they're just so three-dimensional. They pop, and the book is told in third person from several characters' points of view, mostly Polly's and Nate's, her father, but also sometimes from characters that they meet throughout the book. And Jordan Harper does a really great job in cutting all the fat. So it's a fairly fast-paced short book. It's not as long as some others, but there's nothing missing. He's just so on point with his descriptions, the way that he makes these characters and also the story come to life. You have Polly, who is shy and introverted and doesn't really know her place in the world. And whenever you're in her head, when you're reading from her point of view, it's just so authentic and believable that you're like, yes, I'm listening to this 11-year-old who is suddenly thrown into this world of violence and mayhem. And then you read Nate, and Nate is this hardened criminal who has a completely different outlook on life, and knows there's probably no happy ending to what's coming, but he's trying to do the one good thing. And neither one of them wants to be together. This is not a happy reunion. This is a most unhappy reunion. And at the same time, both have to learn from each other to get to the next level if they want to stand any chance of surviving this. And I think it's a great accomplishment for any writer to be able to create all these different facets in a story, but also all these characters that are so uniquely their own. And that is what really fascinated me and pulled me through this. I didn't want the book to end, but it does eventually. And the nice thing is that even though Jordan Harper weaves this world that's probably alien to most of us because it's a world of crime, it is completely relatable. All these characters want the same thing that everybody wants. They want love, they want to survive, they want safety and a better life. And I think that is in many ways what hooked me. So I can only hope that you're going to go and pick it up and check it out despite my ramblings. I love the book. It was fantastic. Jordan Harper wrote many other great books, but this is definitely a good one to start. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Marco. I too loved She Rides Shotgun. I never thought I would say a crime novel with a teddy bear would bring tears to my eyes, but I did weep. And for those that do check out this book, Jordan also has another book called The Last King of California, which was my top read of last year, and it is set in the same world as She Rides Shotgun, and has some links to that story. So you can read 2 for 1. Thank you so much, Marco.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Robin Agnew. Robin Agnew and her husband Jamie owned and operated Aunt Agatha's bookshop in Ann Arbor, Michigan for 26 years. The store won a Raven Award in 2014. Robin wrote the cozy column for Mystery Scene magazine for many years and now has a column in Deadly Pleasures along with her own review blog website, Aunt Agatha's Mysteries. Please check that out, and welcome, Robin.
Thank you so much for including me. I am really appreciative to both of you. My book is Indemnity Only by Sarah Paretsky. I read it around the time it came out, which was 1982. My father-in-law, who was a mystery reader, would send me his book club books that he'd already finished. And he sent me that one. And I was a recent college graduate, and I had read all the Golden Age books. And so after college, I was like I was like drunk with reading. I was reading like Tony Hillerman and Dick Francis and P.D. James and Martha Grimes. And when I cracked open Indemnity Only, it was like a whole other universe for me. This fast-paced book, modeled on James M. Cain's book, Double Indemnity, feminized the protagonist, which was her first revolutionary act. And the plot centered on insurance fraud, kind of pulled on her own experience. And then she set the book very specifically in Chicago, which kind of kicked off a regional mystery trend as well, and a genius move. And she establishes most of the characters in this first book that she carries through the series. And most of them are, VI's community. They hold her up. And she hits the ground running. She is fully realized on page 1, book 1. Catch up with me, her creator seems to be telling the reader, and you can't look up once you start this book. And I think I loved it so much for a couple of reasons. I grew up in Chicago, so the neighborhoods and the streets were familiar to me, which I never had that in a mystery novel before. Most of the ones I'd read were set in London. And then there was VI herself. For someone just out of college trying to figure out her life, VI was kind of a beacon for me. She was strong and fearless, and she knew what she wanted. She wanted her place in the world to be part of a level playing field. And she's full of righteous anger, almost to a fault, gets her beat up a lot. And for her, the feminism is part of the package. As a woman who attended college and high school in the late 70s and early 80s, feminism and the place of women in the world were top of mind to most of the women I knew, most of my classmates. And here was VI giving me a blueprint. A Paretsky novel kind of gives the reader an idea of how a woman might function if she were as badass as Jack Reacher or as sensitive as Adam Dalgliesh. in short, these were books that made me realize mysteries were cool. I wasn't the weird kid in school that was reading an Agatha Christie novel every day. I used to walk around the halls of middle school with my Agatha Christie book. I was a cool woman of the 80s, reading these novels with a bit of crunchy 70s idealism hanging in there too. Anyway, fast forward a decade or so, my husband and I moved from Minneapolis to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and mystery bookstores in the 90s were a big trend. And so we thought, well, that's a good idea. So we opened our store. And while the store was named after my idol, Agatha Christie, the inspiration was V.I. Warshawski. I wanted a store filled with cool books that would change people's lives. And the Paretsky section was so important that we had a bounty. We offered a bounty for used Paretsky novels when we first opened, because we sold new and used books. And then fast forward another decade, and I was absolutely tongue-tied when the woman herself stopped by to chat and sign stock. And I was able to thank her for being an inspiration to me. And I recommended a book to her, which is the best part of our visit. She left the store with In the Bleak Midwinter by Julia Spencer Fleming. My time at the store was a 26-year reading education, and it all started thanks to Sarah Paretsky and that first reading of Indemnity Only. And thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks so much for being here. That's such an awesome, I love that story of the novel that you took us through the decades, the influence there. And I can't believe it was so when it came out, because I was like 11. So that book has been in my life like my whole life. It was always on my mom's shelf like my whole life. It just is part of the DNA of the mystery world. But there are certain people in this community that I hold in such high regard as far as their opinions. And you are on the top of that list, along with Kristopher and Kate Stein. And there's just people that I just look up to that have sort of shown us the way about, here's some good books. So I really appreciate you being here and sharing that story with us. It's amazing.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, anytime. Come back. Our next guest is Julie Hennrikus. I love Julie. I'm so happy she's here. Julie has worked in arts administration for over 30 years and is the current executive director of Sisters in Crime. Her 10th novel, The Plot Thickets, you got me, written as Julia Henry, was published last fall. She also writes as Julianne Holmes and J.A. Hennrikus. She's got lots of identities, but they're all wonderful, and we're so glad she's here. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Shawn, for your kind words. And thank you and Kristopher for inviting me. My pick is inspired by the Amelia Award that inspired this series. And so the Amelia Award is named for a character, Amelia Peabody Emerson, written by the great Elizabeth Peters. Elizabeth Peters wrote a lot of books, as did Barbara Michaels, her alter ego. But Amelia Peabody holds a special place in my heart because I discovered her with The Last Camel Died at Noon, which was the 6th book in the series. That's not the one I chose, though. She started writing the series in 1975 with a standalone, and then she wrote for over 35 years. She wrote the other 20 books or other 19 books in the series. I chose The Snake, the Crocodile, and the Dog, which is the 7th book in the series. It's not my favorite. It's not the best in the series, but I'll tell you why it means something to me. I read the whole series. As I said, I started with The Last Camel Died at Noon. And then I read the whole series as they came out over the years. And Amelia Peabody Emerson, it starts in 1885. It goes up until the discovery of King Tut's tomb, the series does. And Amelia Peabody Emerson is the definition of an unreliable narrator, in that she goes through the world thinking that she's absolutely right, and the other characters help explain how she's off the mark or she's got a good heart. She's just a wonderful character. And Barbara Mertz, who is the actual name of the author, was an Egyptologist. So there's also that level of discovery and of interest. And I always had wanted to go to Egypt, and, so it fed on that. So I've started the series as a reader. During the pandemic, I downloaded the audio books and listened to it to help me get through the pandemic. And the great Barbara Rosenblatt's the narrator in the books. And then I reread the series, and then I listened to it again. And as a writer, I marvel at how she pulled this off. and how she creates this world that is rich in Victorian and through the 20s, England and Egypt, and what's going on in the world, and has World War I and everything else. But in The Last Camel Died at Noon, she and their small son and Emerson, they go on this journey into a lost oasis. And so when I was done with that book, I thought, what's she gonna do? You know, if they went to a lost oasis, they got another daughter out of the deal. I mean, all of this stuff. And in the Snake, the Crocodile, and the Dog, she hits that head on. And she says at the beginning that Amelia is feeling like the spark's gone out of the marriage, and, you know, son and the daughter, and what's going on with her life. And so she completely upends expectations by having this wild adventure where her husband, Emerson, so those of you who haven't read the series, sorry to spoil the first book, but her husband, Emerson, has amnesia for most of the book. They have all these things happening, but she brings in characters from the rest of the book. So in the second book, she has a master criminal that comes in, and that annoyed me when I first read the series, because I'm like, please, master criminal. Well, she starts weaving him throughout the series. And in the seventh book, he plays a role. She also has somebody, Cyrus Vandergelt, who's in the second book. She has Kevin O'Connell. And it's like she spent those first 6 books creating a repertory of wonderful characters. And in the seventh book, she sets the stage. And then she starts playing 3-dimensional chess with her readers, because she starts arcing stories that go till the very end, that go for 2 or 3 books, that hop around, that you need to reference. The books can all be read as standalones, but they're really wonderful if you read them you can read them as she wrote them, or in the chronological order of the books, because she wrote up until the discovery of Tut's tomb, and then she went back and, you know, wrote 3 more that could sort of get fit in during it. But as a writer, I was so inspired by how she obviously challenged herself. I suspect she also started to have longer term contracts, so she knew that it was going to keep going at that point. How she builds this wonderful group of characters who you follow throughout the rest of the book, the next 22 years at that point for where this is. And the great Amelia Peabody. I mean, it's appropriate that an award is named in honor of Elizabeth Peters, because she's one of the founders of Malice, but Amelia Peabody is also one of the great characters. So that's why I chose The Snake, the Crocodile, and the Dog. I highly recommend the entire series. Reach out to me if you want to pick a few, because I can recommend them. But she inspired me as a reader and has entertained me for years. But as a writer, I marvel at what she was able to do with all of her series and all of her work. And I do find that The Snake, the Crocodile, and the Dog is a pivotal book as a writer to help me understand how you pull that off. Not that I could, but how you can.
Thanks so much, Julie. I totally agree. This is a series you just fall into. You end up in that world and you don't ever want to leave. And fortunately, you have many, many, many books. And thank you so very much for mentioning the Amelia Award. I'm quite honored to be receiving the Amelia Award next year from Malice Domestic. It was a shock and a surprise, and I'm very honored. And while we're on the subject of Malice, next year's Malice Domestic our guest of honor is also with us, Sujata Massey, a great friend. Sujata is the author of 17 mysteries and suspense novels that have won the Agatha, Macavity, Lefty, and Mary Higgins Clark Awards. Her current mystery series features Perveen Mystery, the first female lawyer in 1920s Bombay, a character who's based on true groundbreaking women. Her prior series, starring Ray Shimura, a Japanese-American amateur antiques dealer in contemporary Tokyo. Sujata divides her time between her historic home in Baltimore, Maryland, and traveling on book research to Mumbai, India. Thanks for joining us tonight, Sujata.
Well, thanks for having me. And I must say, I'm really enjoying hearing people's favorite books. And what Robin said about what it meant to read a book set in a place where you lived, where you knew the streets, was very true for me in this book, which was my favorite read of 2021, The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. And so while this may look like a literary novel and be shelved on a, not shelved in the mystery section, there really isn't a mystery at the heart of the book. It's set in the world of a small independent bookstore that actually really does exist by the Lake of the Isles and is owned by Louise Erdrich, although she's sometimes referred to in the book as this shadowy character who does this or that. The story of the book belongs to the store's manager, Tuki, who's a woman from the Ojibwe community, and pretty much everybody at the bookstore is native, which is true to life for Birch Bark Books. And she's a bookseller. She's had a really difficult past. She's been in jail. She's got this marriage with a wonderful man, and a stepdaughter through him. And one of the things that is a fact of her life every day in the bookstore is there's this extremely annoying customer, Flora, who's always there and is always trying to insinuate that she has native blood. She's a very, she's appears like a white person and also a person of significant means. And, that kind of comment is really grating to people. And then Flora dies, yet she's haunting the bookstore. They can tell she's haunting the bookstore through a variety of things that happen. And so should Tuki and the other booksellers try to deal with it, or should they just try to get it out? That's part of the question. And then another thing that's going on in this, besides this mystery and what, the thing about the haunting actually has to do with the past, of course, the COVID hits the Twin Cities. It's the novel is set between November 2019 and November 2020. So we all know what that was like when bookstores closed and had to survive. We knew what it was like when our family members went out and got sick, and how do we handle that? And so all of that was going on. And, I was like on the edge of my seat. I was really, really scared for the characters. And then just as they're coming out of it, remember, this is Minneapolis. George Floyd is murdered by the police. So it's what happened there, that aftermath. Should the people in the bookselling community and Tuki's life, how do they handle that? Do they get involved? Do they hold back? And as you look at this incident, I couldn't help but be reminded of, Native people facing government force back in the 1800s when they were driven out of the Twin Cities to make this beautiful Lake of the Isles community. And this book meant a lot to me. I listened to it as an audiobook when I was driving during 2021 from my home in Baltimore to Minneapolis, St. Paul, which is where I grew up. And the audiobook is actually narrated by Louise. So she's not an actor, and it just sounds like a real person talking. And at first I wasn't sure how we'd like it, but then I just kind of fell into it, and I just fell in love, and I cried and I laughed on my trip out. And then I ran into the bookstore and I bought, 5 autograph copies because I wanted to share it with my family, because I felt that this book really said a lot about our lives in the Twin Cities that really felt true to me. And it also taught me a lot about my neighborhood that I didn't know about before. So now I look at the Twin Cities in just sort of like a much larger, nuanced way. Louise Erdrich has written so many books. She's won the Pulitzer Prize. This is one of 18 books that she's written, and I've read a number of her other books. And, so far, this is my favorite.
Oh, that's so cool. I love the fact that novels and stories can sort of open up our ideas, like shine a light on things that we're talking about in the the real world, the news. That's awesome that it had that kind of impact. And anyone that buys 5 copies of something for their family, that's an endorsement right there. That's a good book. They can say, I can't wait to read. I've read her before, but I have not read that book. So I'm gonna jump on that. But thank you so much for being here. It's so great to have
Well, thanks for the invitation. I was really happy to do this.
awesome. The fellow Marylander, and Elizabeth Peters was from Frederick, so it's like it's very very Maryland episode right now. Thanks, Sujata.
Sure.
Our next guest is Karen Odden. Karen is a USA Today bestselling author. She received her PhD from NYU, taught at UW Milwaukee, and edited for academic journals before writing fiction set in 1870s London. Her 5th novel, Under a Veiled Moon, 2022, was nominated for the Agatha, Lefty, and Anthony Awards for Best Historical Mystery and features Michael Coravan, a former thief turned Scotland Yard inspector. Karen serves on the National Board of Sisters in Crime, thank you for your service, and divides her time between Arizona and Utah. Connect with her at her website, which is hername.com. Thanks for being here. Karen, what you got for us today?
Well, first of all, thanks so much to both of you for having me. Congrats to Kristopher for the Amelia Award. And I have to say, I appreciate how much both of you do giving back to the mystery community. And I'm honored to be here with all these distinguished authors. For my book, I chose This Rough Magic by Mary Stewart. It is an oldie. It was published in 1964, a year before I was born. And Mary Stewart was nominated twice for Edgar Awards, and one of them for this book. And she won the Lifetime Achievement Award at Malice Domestic in 1996. Her first book, Madam, Will You Talk, was published in 1954, and she wrote for over 50 years, ending in 1997 with The Rose Cottage. So I discovered This Rough Magic when I was about 11 years old. I think that's kind of like a magic year, it seems to be in this group. I grew up in Rochester, New York, and every Sunday we would go to my grandparents' house out in Bergen, and the house was in the middle of a pine forest. My younger brother and all the cousins would go outside and climb trees, and the adults would play bridge. And I, being a weird kid, would bring a book and read in my grandmother's library. And it was this fabulous U-shaped room with a stone fireplace and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and one of those 70s recliners covered in fake gold fur that would rock forward and back. Maybe you can picture it. So one day I had finished the book that I brought, and I thought, well, I'll read something here. So I found a shelf with some very colorful books, and I pulled one down. And there was some fancy gold writing on the cover, and there was a pretty girl with a ruffly dress, and there was this man who had lost his shirt somewhere. And I had found my grandmother's stash of bodice rippers. Well, I started reading, and my grandmother happened to walk by and saw me, and she sort of bustled in and plucked the book out of my hands and said, "Oh, you don't want to be reading that. How about these?" And she steered me toward a shelf with Daphne du Maurier, Victoria Holt, Phyllis Whitney, and Mary Stewart. So I read The Moon Spinners that day, and it's set in the Greek Isle of Crete. And every week I'd read a different book. So I read Rebecca, Jamaica Inn, Nine Coaches Waiting. I sort of worked my way through the whole shelf. In each of these books, a young, usually empathetic, resourceful woman is thrown into a sinister situation, usually involving a dead body, often in an exotic locale. And she must become an amateur sleuth, and she usually ends up in a romance. So This Rough Magic is set in Corfu, another Greek isle. Lucy Waring is an actress whose play in London has just closed, and she's feeling rather crushed. So she comes to visit her sister, who lives in a villa overlooking the bay. One neighbor that is of theirs is Godfrey Manning. He's a photographer who takes his boat out daily to capture photographs. Another is Sir Julian Gale, a famous Shakespearean stage actor, and his handsome son, Max, a musician. Sir Gale is godfather to a boy, Spiro, and one day Spiro falls out of Manning's boat and drowns in what seems to be a terrible accident. But then another dead body appears, and Lucy and Max must uncover the truth, which involves international smuggling and murder. So one reason I love this book is that it feels remarkably contemporary, even though it was written 60 years ago. And I think it's because this book is about people and relationships, which are pretty timeless. These are not quite locked room mysteries, but they take place in small villages or islands with small casts. And they trace the delicate strands of longing and fear, desire and rage, jealousy and greed. In the first episode of this podcast that you have going, Wanda talked about the emotional touch points in Beloved. And I like that idea, this book has moments where these human emotions are similarly laid bare. A second reason I love Stuart's books is you get a wonderful sense of place. The light, the plants, the culture, the windmills, the clothes, the food. She's always throwing in little Greek phrases or French ones in the ones she sets in France. And lastly, I love that all of her books have a literary element. So the phrase, "this rough magic," is from my favorite Shakespeare play, The Tempest, in the final act, when Prospero flings aside his magical powers and drowns his book. And Corfu was actually probably the site of the shipwreck that inspired The Tempest. So these books definitely shaped the first 3 books I wrote. In each, I have a different young woman protagonist who becomes an amateur sleuth. The setting is exotic, at least for me, in that it's 1870s London, which is gritty and gorgeous. It's a world I know down to the smells of the Thames and the tea and the tallow and the candles. And I try to work all of that into my books because I know how powerful it was for me as I was a young reader. And whenever I do author talks and mention Mary Stuart, I always get a few nods from my audience. I think now her books might be called romantic suspense, but I'd recommend them for anyone who likes atmospheric tales with amateur sleuths and some romance thrown in. So I hope you enjoy it, and let me know what you think. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Karen. I do think that the Gothics don't get enough respect, even today. They very much influence the mystery genre, so I'm glad you brought Mary Stuart to us, and This Rough Magic is a great example of what she can do. So thank you so much for bringing that to us. Our next guest is Ivy Pochoda. Ivy is the author of the critically acclaimed novels Wonder Valley, Visitation Street, and These Women, which was a New York Times Best Thriller of 2020. These Women was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, the Edgar Award, the California Book Prize, the Macavity Award, and the International Thriller Writers Award. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. She teaches creative writing at the Studio 526 Skid Row. Her latest novel is the incredible Sing Her Down. Welcome, Ivy.
Thank you so much. So as a novelist and teacher of creative writing, there's no book that I've recommended more frequently than Dan Shawn's Await Your Reply. This is literally the book that I wish I had written. And every time I sit down to write a novel, I feel like I'm going to try to attempt to rewrite it. It's right in my wheelhouse. It's a mystery that's not really a mystery, and it's a crime novel where the crime isn't really on stage if there is a crime at all. And it focuses again on character. One of the things I love about this book, if more than anything, is if you're a writer, there's something that happens to you infrequently where you realize you're writing one thing and a different story reveals itself. Dan Shawn wrote this book as 3 self-standing short stories or novellas, and his wife, who was editing it previous to her death, told him that it was all one book, and it took very little work for him to put it all together. In reading that fact after I had finished the book, it just made the book so much more resonant to me, because what it taught me was that he didn't quite acknowledge what was going on in his head, but he was working towards something sort of subconsciously that was working in perfect harmony together. The book is really, it came out maybe 14 years ago, 12 years ago, I can't quite remember, but it is so relevant today. It's about identity theft and computer crime. It's about, there's 3 interconnected stories. A man searching for his twin brother, a young girl who's run away with her teacher, and a man and his son who are on the run from a gang of cyber criminals. Going into the plot won't really do you much good because it's complicated and beautiful and elegant, but I can't really describe how powerful it is to see the weave of these stories and how seamlessly they're woven together, especially in light of the fact that they weren't intended to. Dan Shawn visits the same themes in all of his work, from You Remind Me of Me to his latest Sleepwalk, but Await Your Reply for me is sort of a seminal work. It taught me that cool, funky crime novels could make it to 100 notable books in the New York Times list. It makes me, inspires me every day to work harder and to know that what I work on is going to be received because it's a little offbeat and not mainstream. So I think there's something for everyone here. There's 3 stories, and I always love a book that has 3 different pathways into the story in case one doesn't appeal to you. There's another one. I think Dan Shawn is a writer who is really underappreciated. He is working at the top of the game. He is unflinching, and he is bold and brave and scary and a little bit depraved. And I can't think of anyone else who I could recommend on this show or anywhere else.
Well, we'll take a little bit depraved for sure. That's what, and we're all, like Karen said, a bunch of weird kids, hanging out, which is fun. So that's a resounding recommendation. I'm very excited to dive in because I'm one of those people that will have to start appreciating him very soon. Thank you so much for that and for being here, Ivy. Our next guest is Alex Segura. Alex is a best-selling and acclaimed author of novels and comic books. His works include the LA Times Book Prize winning mystery Secret Identity, which is kind of such a cool book cover. The Anthony Award nominated Pete Fernandez Miami Mystery Series, Spider-Verse Adventure Araya, Spider-Man 2099 Dark Tomorrow, Star Wars Poe Dameron Freefall, and various comic books, including stories featuring iconic characters like Spider-Man, the Avengers, the X-Men, Superman, and his own creations. And you're my 13-year-old son's, he thinks you're the coolest guest. So welcome to the show.
Oh, happy to be here. Thanks, Kristopher and Shawn, for having me. It's so cool it's like a BoucherCon preview, even though this is coming out after, to see everyone that we'll hopefully get to hang out with at the show. The book I picked is Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I wanted to pick something pretty recent. I also wanted to pick something from a Latinx author, but what really resonates with me about this book and what resonates with me about Silvia's work as a whole is how she doesn't fall into genre buckets. None of her work feels like it has to naturally be shelved in a certain place. She's written Mexican Gothic, Velvet Was the Night, The Island of Dr. Moreau, not The Island of The Daughter of Dr. Moreau. And all her stuff feels like such a fun genre mashup, and that really appeals to me. It's the kind of stuff I like to read, the kind of things I like to write about. And Attica Locke said this when she was talking at Virginia Fest, or we were talking about books. She says that sometimes books are in conversation with each other. And when I read Silver Nitrate, I could almost, not to make this about me, but I could almost see Carmen from Secret Identity interacting with the protagonist from Silver Nitrate. Montserrat, who's a sound editor in Mexico in the 90s, and she's part of this very boys club type of industry. She's very talented at what she does, but she doesn't have really a foothold in editing. And she is passionate and really obsessed with horror movies and the Mexican horror movie scene. And she lives a pretty lonely existence. She has one close friend, Tristan, who is a washed-up soap opera actor whose career took a nosedive after a very tragic accident that took the life of his then girlfriend. But we kind of see their dynamic. They're close friends. There maybe was an opportunity for romance years before, but that ramp was not taken, and so they're in this weird kind of middle ground. And Tristan discovers that one of his new neighbors is a kind of cult movie director, horror director from Mexico named Abel Urrueta, who has kind of been living in seclusion in this building that Tristan just moved into. And so he gets Montserrat and this director together to just kind of go over his career. And he's obviously on cloud nine because he's talking to two fans and he's lived in seclusion for all this time. And we start to learn about this mythic lost movie called, The Yellow Door. This movie that was never completed, that was, shut down under mysterious circumstances. And what Silvia does really well is she starts teasing out these things that fray the edges of reality. You start to realize that there's some elements of the occult, there's some supernatural elements, and we learn that Urrueta has a scene from the film in his freezer on Silver Nitrate. And I didn't know this. I'm not a technical film person, but apparently Silver Nitrate was used for film decades ago, but it's very combustible, which I guess is a nice little metaphor for the book itself. But he cast a spell, or tried to cast a spell, while filming this movie. And I swear to you, I'm not giving away the whole plot. This is literally in the first 50 pages, so no spoilers, no massive spoilers here. But he tried to cast a spell while filming this movie, and it went awry. And since then, anyone that was involved with the movie, if you like the book Night Film, this has a lot of Night Film vibes, and it's another book I love. I love books that just immerse you in an industry, in a world. And there's a little bit similar to what Ivy said. There's a crime, but it's not necessarily about the crime. Like there's all this cool stuff happening and you feel like you could get lost in this world. And Sylvia does this really well in that it's clear that she knows about horror cinema. She knows about the Mexican movie scene of the 90s. And I like how she makes this metatextual story. Like, if you just read this, you could think, well, there must have been an Abel Urrueta and there must have been the Yellow Door. And that's felt really evocative to me. And so you find out that he tried to cast a spell. He failed. Anyone that was involved in the movie was either killed or maligned in some way. Urrueta being a prime example, his career went south. But he tells him, I've got this scene, this canister in my freezer, and I want you guys to help me cast a spell to reclaim this film and reclaim my life and my career and let me continue and not be cursed, basically. And so as they agree to do this, or as they start to kind of go back and forth, strange things start happening. And the line between reality and the supernatural really starts to fade. And that's when it really kicks into high gear and feels like a totally different novel from what you started with. And that's really what I love about it. I love that it can't just be pigeonholed into one genre. It's a mystery, it's a thriller, it has really elements of the occult. It's got a lot of pop culture in it. It's a historical novel. So it doesn't feel like she's just pulling genre levers to just put out something just that fits into anyone's definition of what should be. And her writing is really strong. I think her characters are really memorable. The names alone, like you're reading the names and they feel like they roll off your tongue so well. Like I also feel like, you not only deal with the big picture plot, but you want to spend time with these characters long after the scenes are over. And I think that's synonymous with a lot of her books. I know she's not like an under the radar author. I mean, she wrote Mexican Gothic, which was a huge bestseller, but I also feel like that's her defining book, but she's written a lot of other books that are just as evocative and memorable. And, yeah, it was just a fun ride for me to read. And it's, I'm going to be a fan of her books as long as she keeps writing them.
Thanks so much, Alex. I too am a fan of Sylvia's work. I love Mexican Gothic. I have not read Silver Nitrate, but as soon as I saw that you were picking it, I did order it, so I'll be reading that soon. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, and I hope everyone will go and check that out. We have seen on the show now that we were looking into the past. So last episode, we added a coda at the end of the episodes where Shawn and I talked about a book that we're looking forward to in the future. So we just want to do that so that we're seeing both ends of the spectrum, books from the past that we love, and then books that might be things we love in the future. So I'm going to let Shawn go ahead and do hers first.
Thank you. Also, I had to say, Night Film, Kristopher gave me, I think, the galley of that years ago to read, because he's my guru. He just says, oh, Shawn will like this, because he knows exactly what I like. So the book I am looking forward to, and I can't wait to read the one that Alex was talking about as well. The book I'm looking forward to coming up soon is Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. She's the author of Luckiest Girl Alive, which is a book that has stayed with me for a really long time. And I cannot wait to read this new book. The tagline, the headline of it is, 2 women from opposite sides of the country are brought together by violent acts of the same man and become allies and sisters in arms as they pursue the justice that would otherwise elude them in one of the most acclaimed, highly anticipated thrillers of the year. So I think it's loosely based on the Ted Bundy case. Everybody knows I'm a murderino. I love my true crime, but I really love true crime novelized as well. So I cannot wait to read this. It also has a very cool book cover, which, I'm kind of a psycho about book covers. I love book covers. But yes, I cannot wait for this book. I'm very excited.
Great choice, Shawn. And for mine, if I was to manifest the perfect book to represent the idea of We Are What We Read, I couldn't have come up with a better book than this. It's Happiness Falls by Angie Kim. This book will change the life of every person that reads it, and that's not an exaggeration. I know we often say that books change lives, but very often that's an exaggeration. That is not the case here. Angie Kim has written a book that is, as I said in my review, a missing person story mashed up with a metaphysical manifesto, a discussion of happiness. What does happiness mean? How do we communicate? Basically, it's the story of a Korean American family. The father is very interested in studying happiness and why people are happy and how people become happy. And he one day goes for a walk with his developmentally challenged son into the woods. And when the son returns without the father, the family is thrown into turmoil and needs to figure out what happened to the father, because they know he would never have sent this non-verbal son back alone. The child cannot express what happened, so they are thrown to the police, who then begin to suspect the family is hiding a secret. So it's perfect. It will really, like I said, change your life. You will not be the same person when you turn the final page. It is, at the moment, my favorite book of the year. And as I said in my review, it's also probably going to be in my list of favorite books of all time. So check out Happiness Falls by Angie Kim when it's released. Thank you to all my guests for joining us tonight. It's another great episode. There's so much here to read. I hope that you found new things to love, things that brought back memories of things you've read in the past. And I hope that you will join us for our next episode. And until then, read often and read widely. Thanks so much, folks.